What if the silence you once feared was the very shield that kept your soul intact? There are moments when answering immediately feels like an obligation, when the urge to explain yourself or defend your position rises almost uncontrollably. Yet each rushed word often drains more than it protects. To pause before speaking is not passivity, it is an act of sovereignty. In the quiet pause, your heart gathers strength, your emotions settle, and your dignity remains whole. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow as that hidden force that erupts when left unchecked. Silence, at its most conscious, is the containment of that shadow, a way to prevent your wounds from speaking louder than your wisdom. Think of the times when a delayed response preserved your peace. A text left unanswered for hours revealed more about your worth than a page of explanations ever could. A calm gaze held in silence ended arguments that words would only inflame. But not all silence carries the same weight. There is a silence born of fear, of not knowing how to stand up for yourself, of retreating because your voice feels small. That silence weakens you. Then there is the silence of choice, the kind that signals self-respect, that whispers, "I do not owe you every thought I carry." The difference lies not in the absence of words, but in the energy behind them. Jung might call this the archetype of the guardian, the inner figure that stands watch over your essence. When you choose silence as protection, you are not surrendering. You are declaring, without sound, that your presence is not to be wasted on ears that do not listen. Notice the signs. Does your silence bring you relief and clarity, or does it leave you anxious and diminished? That is how you know whether it serves you or betrays you. Silence also acts as a natural filter in relationships. Those who respect you will stay, even when you do not rush to fill the space. Those who thrive on control will grow restless and step away. The absence of immediate answers exposes hidden motives. A man who values you does not panic at the pause. He understands that reflection is part of intimacy. A man who seeks only dominance interprets your silence as a threat because it takes away his power to provoke. Jung describes silence as a mirror of the unconscious. In the stillness you hold, the other reveals himself, his impatience, his fears, his intentions. In resisting the pressure of instant replies, you claim the right to let truth surface without force. There is also a magnetism in a woman who does not rush. The pause makes others lean closer, curious to hear when and if she will speak. The fewer the words, the stronger the impression. It is the paradox of restraint. What you do not say often resonates louder than what you do. This is the presence of the queen archetype, a figure centered in her being who knows her worth so profoundly that she feels no need to justify it. Women who have mastered this art of silence often discover that their relationships change. Arguments dissolve before escalating. Respect deepens without demands. Even admiration grows, not because of what they said, but because of the strength they showed in holding back. Finally, there are silences that mark the end of a cycle. No word, no explanation, no plea could protect you more than stepping back into quiet. There comes a moment when silence is no longer strategy, but boundary. It is the firm line that says, "This ends here." Jung's idea of individuation reminds us that wholeness requires discernment, knowing when to speak and when to withdraw completely. Choosing not to engage in empty dialogue is not avoidance, it is self-preservation. Some closures arrive not with dramatic scenes, but with the absence of response, with the empty chair, with the unanswered call. In those moments, silence becomes not just an act, but a declaration of integrity. You are not abandoning the conversation. You are ending the cycle that no longer deserves your voice. So the question remains, how many times have your words tried to save what your silence could have ended with far more grace? Have you ever wondered why silence sometimes feels heavier than confrontation? In relationships, it often functions as a silent stage where deeper truths unfold. When you stop speaking, patterns emerge. Silence can unmask intentions more clearly than 1,000 explanations. A man who values you will respect your pause, wait for your timing, and honor the space you create. A man who only sought control will interpret your silence as defiance and reveal his impatience. In this way, silence becomes less about withdrawal and more about revelation. It shows who belongs and who was only there for convenience. Jung described silence as a mirror of the unconscious, and indeed, when words are absent, what lies beneath rises to the surface. The power of this pause is psychological as well. By not yielding to the pressure of immediacy, you step out of the cycle of reactive communication. Every time you delay an answer, you reclaim your inner ground. Instead of being swept away by someone else's urgency, you give yourself the chance to feel, to weigh, and to respond, or not. The absence of instant reaction preserves your dignity and prevents regret. It is in this pause that self-respect is nourished. Silence, then, is not a void. It is an active choice that reshapes the rhythm of the connection. It teaches others that your attention is not automatic, that your energy is sacred, and that not every demand deserves an answer. There is also an undeniable magnetism in this restraint. The woman who does not rush to justify herself exudes a strength that is both quiet and unshakable. The less she explains, the more intriguing she becomes. It is the paradox of mystery. What remains unsaid often amplifies presence. This is the aura of the queen archetype, the one who remains centered, who does not run after approval, who knows her worth is self-contained. Those around her sense it instinctively. Respect is drawn to her, not by force, but by the weight of her composure. In every pause, she communicates, "I am here, whole, whether or not you understand me." And it is this stance that often earns admiration more than endless words could. Think of the women who discovered clarity through silence. One chose not to argue back when accused unjustly, and her calm absence of reaction left the accuser exposed in his own contradictions. Another resisted the urge to explain why she was no longer available, letting her absence speak with more precision than any statement. These are not stories of weakness, but of strength. Strength born in the ability to hold still while others rush to fill the space. The courage to stay silent is not passivity. It is mastery of self. And yet, silence is not always easy. It requires discernment. It asks whether your quiet comes from avoidance or from power. Jung's teaching on individuation reminds us that becoming whole means integrating both voice and silence, action and stillness. The silence that heals is not the silence that hides. It is the silence that says, "I have chosen peace over noise." It is the silence that refuses to waste energy on what does not nurture. Each pause becomes an act of protection, a declaration that your presence cannot be forced into noise that diminishes it. When silence is chosen at the right moment, it becomes the most eloquent language. It does not erase your truth. It amplifies it without distortion. It tells the world that not every question deserves an answer, not every provocation deserves a fight, not every disrespect deserves a stage. The silence you carry is not emptiness, but fullness, the fullness of self-awareness, the fullness of dignity, the fullness of a heart that refuses to be drained again. So ask yourself, what would happen if, instead of speaking to be heard, you allowed your silence to reveal what others would rather keep hidden? Have you noticed how silence can act like a doorway, separating those who respect you from those who only want to use you? In relationships, silence works as a natural filter. It is in the empty space that intentions become visible. Those who truly care about you do not panic when you step back. They wait, they honor, they stay. Those who thrive on control or validation, however, quickly reveal their discomfort. They try to provoke, to rush, to demand words that will feed their need for dominance. In this way, silence shows you who is capable of patience and who only values you when you are easy to access. Jung described silence as a reflection of the unconscious. In the pauses you create, the unconscious motives of others rise to the surface without disguise. This filtering power becomes especially clear when you refuse to answer under pressure. The modern world rewards immediacy, but intimacy requires depth. By holding silence, you break the cycle of urgency. You prove that not every message deserves an instant reply, and not every demand deserves your energy. Psychologically, this pause strengthens self-respect. Instead of being pulled into someone else's rhythm, you teach them to step into yours. You reclaim authority over your own presence, showing that attention is not something you give away cheaply. In this sense, silence becomes a boundary drawn without words, more effective than any explanation could ever be. Consider how many misunderstandings come from speaking too quickly. An argument escalates because words outran reflection. A text sent in haste becomes the seed of regret. Now imagine the reverse. You wait, you breathe, you choose silence, and suddenly the conflict deflates on its own. In that pause, the other person reveals far more than you could. Their tone, their patience, their true character surfaces when there is no answer to push against. Your restraint becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, their hidden fears and intentions appear. What you refused to say spoke louder than any defense could have done. Jung often pointed out that silence can serve as a mirror of the unconscious, not only for you, but for the people around you. When you are silent, you are not erasing yourself. You are creating space for others to expose who they really are. A man who cannot handle your pause is a man afraid of his own reflection. A man who respects your silence is one who sees beyond his own urgency. This is why silence is not weakness. It is the most subtle form of discernment, separating illusion from truth without confrontation. The psychological impact of resisting immediacy is profound. When you do not give in to the pressure of answering right away, you teach your nervous system to remain calm. You give your heart a chance to breathe before it reacts. This is not repression, it is maturity. You learn that not every impulse deserves to become a sentence. Silence becomes a practice of self-care, like closing a door softly instead of slamming it. It is the refusal to let others dictate the tempo of your emotions. In this discipline, you discover freedom, the freedom to choose when, how, and even if you will respond. And so silence becomes more than absence. It becomes presence. It is not empty, but filled with meaning. It says, I am listening, I am observing, I am deciding. It speaks of value, of restraint, of clarity. It filters the people who cannot stand waiting, exposing their shallow intentions, while keeping close those who understand that love cannot be rushed. Silence is not about ignoring the world. It is about aligning yourself with what truly matters. The question is, are you willing to trust your silence enough to let it reveal what words could never confess? Have you ever wondered why the woman who waits before speaking often commands more respect than the one who rushes to explain herself? Silence, when chosen with awareness, becomes magnetic. The pause unsettles, intrigues, and commands attention in ways that words never could. When you resist the urge to justify yourself immediately, you project an aura of composure. Others lean closer, not because you begged for their attention, but because your restraint makes them wonder what lies beneath. This paradox is timeless. The less you offer, the more powerful your presence becomes. It is not about withholding affection. It is about knowing that your value is not measured by the speed of your responses. This magnetism grows from the depth of self-assurance. When you do not rush to fill silence, you signal that you are not desperate for validation. Jung might frame this as the archetype of the queen, a presence rooted in her own center, radiating strength without effort. The queen does not chase approval, nor does she apologize for her stillness. Her silence communicates dignity, and dignity draws respect. In every relationship, the woman who embodies this energy teaches others how she expects to be treated. She does not beg, she does not over-explain, she does not crumble under pressure. She chooses presence over performance. Think of the times you admired someone who answered slowly or not at all. Their pause carried weight. Their silence made you consider your own words more carefully. This is the hidden power of restraint. It creates an atmosphere where every word counts, where attention is sharpened, where respect naturally rises. Silence becomes a stage, and when you finally do speak, your words resonate with greater authority because they are rare. In relationships, this dynamic can shift everything. Instead of being predictable, you become intriguing. Instead of being reactive, you become commanding. Real stories show this truth. A woman once told me she stopped explaining herself to a partner who constantly demanded reasons. At first, he pushed harder, trying to provoke. But over time, he realized that her silence meant she would not play into endless justifications. The balance of power shifted. She gained clarity, and he was forced to confront his own behavior. Another woman described how silence helped her escape an argument that would have spiraled. By choosing not to respond, she preserved her dignity and revealed more about his impatience than her own. These are not moments of passivity, but of deliberate choice. This magnetism is not about manipulation, it is about integrity. When you hold silence, you are not creating games. You are embodying truth, that not everything deserves a reply, and that your worth does not hinge on immediate explanation. Jung spoke of individuation as the path to becoming whole. Silence, in this sense, is part of individuation. It is the act of separating yourself from the noise, so your essence remains intact. It is not about punishing others, it is about honoring yourself. The pause becomes a declaration that you belong first to yourself, and only then to those who prove worthy of your voice. The admiration that follows is not accidental. People respect what is not easily consumed. They value what is rare, steady, and firm. A woman who does not rush teaches those around her that her energy is precious. In this way, silence is not empty space. It is presence, elegance, and strength woven together. It is the invisible thread that holds dignity in place. And perhaps the deeper question is this: when was the last time you allowed silence to speak for you and discovered it carried more weight than any word could ever hold? When do words stop protecting you and start betraying your peace? There comes a moment when speaking no longer saves a relationship, when every explanation only feeds conflict, and when silence is the only boundary left. At that point, silence is not avoidance, but protection. It becomes the final act of care for yourself. By refusing to argue further, by closing the door softly, you are not losing, you are choosing. Jung's vision of individuation reminds us that wholeness demands separation from noise that does not honor us. To stay quiet in the face of disrespect is not weakness. It is the clearest signal that your soul has decided enough. Silence here becomes non-negotiable. It is the invisible line that cannot be crossed. You no longer explain why you need space. You no longer repeat why something hurt. You let absence do the speaking. Absence that cannot be twisted. Absence that cannot be debated. The refusal to engage tells the truth more powerfully than 100 arguments. It says, "I will not spend another drop of my energy where it is not respected." That decision marks the beginning of freedom, even when it feels like loss. The cost of silence may be heavy at first, but it always weighs less than the burden of constant noise. This kind of silence is also an act of dignity. To disengage from a dialogue that has lost meaning is to preserve the fragments of yourself that would otherwise be scattered in endless justifications. Words can be bent, misunderstood, or ignored. Silence cannot. In silence, you reclaim authorship over your life. You choose not to perform, not to explain, not to negotiate your worth. This is not retreat. It is arrival into the space where your presence is enough without validation. It is a declaration that peace matters more than proving a point. Many women discover this in painful but liberating ways. One walked away from years of constant arguments, realizing her last word would never be heard anyway. Another chose not to reply to a final message, knowing that no answer could restore what was already broken. Their silence did not erase their pain, but it honored their strength. Each step away, each unanswered call was a thread cut from a web that no longer held them. They learned that closure is not always spoken. Sometimes closure is simply the sound of nothing more to say. From a Jungian perspective, this silence is individuation in motion. To individuate is to become whole, and wholeness cannot exist where you are drained by dialogue that strips away your essence. Choosing silence in the face of disrespect is the psyche's way of protecting its core. It is refusing to let the shadow of another consume your light. It is honoring the self that has grown through pain and now insists on peace. Silence becomes a sacred boundary, an affirmation that your story no longer needs to be rewritten by those who failed to honor it. And so, the final silence is not an ending, but a beginning. It is the quiet that opens space for new connections, deeper respect, and truer love. It is the doorway to peace that words could never create. When you close one chapter with silence, you allow life to write the next one with clearer ink. The absence of noise becomes the presence of self. And perhaps the most important reflection is this: if silence is the only language left that preserves your dignity, are you brave enough to let it speak for you, even when it means saying nothing at all?